Pedir para vocês se posicionarem para a gente poder dar início. Hoje o dia vai ser diferente, né? Hoje a dinâmica dessa nossa manhã de trabalho vai ser um pouco diferente. Em vez de ter o coffee break entre as duas apresentações, nós teremos o Dr. Steve Hughes e teremos também a Lia Diskin falando hoje aqui para a gente, mas hoje vai ser de um jeitinho um pouco diferente, porque teremos um coffee break bem carioca, vocês vão entender depois o que eu estou querendo dizer. Então, a gente vai ter as duas palestras, depois o coffee break e depois um encerramento festivo, que eu tenho certeza que todos vão sentir o maravilhamento da Maria Montessori. Eu quero avisar que a Esmirna vai sortear um vale de material entre as escolas participantes. Não é necessário fazer inscrição, eles já têm a lista das escolas participantes da primeira Conferência Internacional Montessori e vão fazer esse sorteio logo após, né, durante o coffee break, quando estiver começando os preparativos para o coffee break, eles virão fazer esse sorteio. E nós faremos a entrega dos certificados após o encerramento, depois desse encerramento festivo. A entrega dos certificados vai acontecer lá embaixo no Piano Bar, que é aquela sala onde houve o credenciamento, onde todo mundo passou mais cedo no início da semana, no início da conferência, para pegar os crachás. Bom, dito isso, eu acho que já está mais do que na hora de chamar Dr. Steve Hughes, né, para nos ensinar um pouco mais, né, e hoje o tema hoje é a construção do agente moral. Dr. Steve Hughes, por favor. Good morning.
Such a lovely conference, and I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you.
Bom dia. It's good? You hear? Yeah? Mic's good? Yes? Audio good? Okay, so yesterday we talked a lot about the brain developmental value of Montessori yesterday and the day before. And so we're going to now today talk about, everything we grow, everything we gain, every capability we develop, of course it resides in the brain. So really, we're always developing brains. When we learn new things, when we become wiser, there's a brain foundation for that. I wonder if we can turn the lights down a little bit. Yeah.
Vocês podem baixar um pouquinho a luz? Eu não pedi isso no início, por favor. I'm so sorry.
It just makes it a little friendlier when we can be more intimate and quieter, and yeah, I like that. A little further, let's bring him down, let's make it nice. Okay, so everybody's here. So, we've been talking about the brain, and I know you brought yours with you today. So we're going to keep stretching it a little bit. We're going to stretch it a little bit further. And we're going to talk about something that is a kind of cognition, but it's not the kind of cognition that I've been talking about so far. And I want to begin by giving an example of the kind of cognition that I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to give you the example of this man. Who knows who this man is? If you know who this man is, raise your hand. His name is Vasily Alexandrovich Arkhipov. Arkhipov. He was a Soviet naval officer. So I'm going to talk about a Russian naval officer right now. Do you know why? You should know why, because this man is a hero. In fact, he's a hero for the whole world. because he did something during a time in history when we came the closest to global annihilation of any point in our history, maybe up until now. It was an event that happened, well, it happened 2 days after I was born in 1962. I was born in the midst of an event in history that, at least in American history books, is called the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was when Russia was placing missiles in Cuba, which would have had a direct threat upon the United States. And so the United States created a naval blockade and prevented shipping from going to Cuba. And of course, the Russians didn't like the blockade, and there was lots of sort of chess pieces moving on the chess table. And this man was the flotilla commander of the submarine fleet. And he was second in command of the nuclear missile submarine designated B-59. And B-59 was submerged, and there was limited information, and they were kind of on their own. They felt their information had been cut off, and they were being attacked by a U.S. destroyer that was dropping depth charges. Well, there were depth charges that were apparently, in naval warfare, there's like your big depth charge, and then there's your warning depth charge. A warning depth charge is just a big bang, not a big boom, okay? So they were dropping these warning depth charges, which kind of apparently, as I understand, is the signal, you come up right now or we're coming for you, okay? That's the signal. But they didn't trust that signal. It wasn't clear just what was going on overhead. Their communications were cut off. And they were beginning to panic. Now, all three commanders on board the submarine had to authorize the launch of nuclear missiles. And two commanders were ready to launch. They had decided the threat was real. We are at war with America. It is our patriotic duty to launch our missiles to destroy American cities. Two officers said, let's go. In fact, the political officer had said, let's go. The submarine commander had said, let's go. Arkhipov had to also say, let's go, for them to launch. And he refused. He refused his military obligation. He refused the peer pressure of having even the political officer, and I think you can understand the power that the political officer on a submarine would have in the Soviet Union. And he refused. And the great stress, great concern, and ultimately, when they finally did surface sometime later, it was determined that there had not been a threat. That the tensions were high, but it had not reached the point where they would have launched. And had they launched, it would have triggered an international thermonuclear war. In fact, in 2002, a man named Thomas Blanton, who was then the director of U.S. National Security Archives, said that Vasily Arkhipov saved the world. That close, one man stood his ground. So he stood his ground. And this is as bad as it got then. There was a challenge, and ultimately the matter was resolved, and this didn't happen. But it could have happened. So what does it take? What does it take? What is the strength of character that is required to make a decision that will almost certainly destroy your career? Okay, maybe a small matter compared to destroying the world. But people make decisions with the information they have around them. They make decisions on the basis of pressure, social pressure, incomplete information, fear, anxiety. So what does it take to be a person in the face of all of that who says, I won't do this, I won't give this authorization, this will not happen? But they're already dropping the bombs. The Americans are already destroying your family. We don't know that, and I'm not making this decision. So what an example of autonomy. Okay, I'm not making the decision that others are making. I'm making a very principled decision. We don't have the information we need, and this is a big decision. This is a big decision, and I'm not going to make it capriciously. What does it take to be able to hold your ground in the face of all the social pressure? Okay, losing your career, fine, but of course, what's the other option? We lose the world. And what role can school play in that? What are children learning in school? I know the experiences that they have in school promoting the development of that kind of moral agency, that kind of autonomy in moral decision-making, that kind of principle in moral decision-making. Lucky for us that that man had that kind of character, but it could have been somebody else sitting in his shoes who didn't. What are the things that we can do at school to help promote the development of that kind of moral character? Now, I'm going to show you a little video of something happening in some school. And what's happening in this classroom is a direct reflection of an education policy decision that was made in the United States almost 20 years ago. Well, okay, 15 years ago. And that was a decision at the beginning of George Bush's first administration to emphasize, to require, to mandate national testing of children on academic knowledge. Academic testing for all children across America multiple times over the course of their school career. With the results of that testing having real and meaningful consequences on teachers, on school principals, and administrators even higher up the ladder. If children did not make what was defined as adequate yearly progress on school testing, the school could actually be closed if the whole school wasn't making adequate yearly progress. The teacher could lose his or her job if their students weren't making adequate yearly progress. And so there was a tremendous emphasis then on having school be about preparing children to take these really important examinations. In fact, that became the only thing that was important in school. And so pedagogy became increasingly modified around just teaching the stuff on the test. And teacher behavior also became modified, because it turns out that if you want to do the best you can on those tests, you make sure you're teaching the test material and repeating the test material all day. And in fact, things like anything that's not on the test. So the test is basic language skills. They call it English language arts and mathematics. And those are the only two tests that mattered. So everything else didn't matter. But for the teacher's job matters. And so other things that are not on the test, just as a natural order of things, no longer matter and are de-emphasized. And this pattern happens everywhere that a government decides that the only thing that matters in education is how well children do on nationalized, norm-referenced tests. It's a natural law at work. In fact, there's even a name for this. There's a man who identified this in 1976. His name was Donald Campbell. He wrote about this in an obscure social research publication. And this has been called Campbell's Law. The more you emphasize any single measure to measure a process, the more that process becomes distorted to promote gains on the measure that is the only measure you care about. And of course that happens. That's human nature. So as a consequence, what happens in school changed. Now, it didn't change immediately, but it changed over time as it became increasingly clear that we really got to get those test scores up. Now, the test scores for most children were fine. It was the test scores for children being raised in poverty or with poor social backgrounds. Their scores were low. And so it became the job of the school to somehow elevate the scores of all the poor children, which is good, except the score wasn't the condition. The condition was poverty. The score reflected the condition of poverty. Schools can't cure poverty. And they can try very hard to teach the child living in chronic stress, with housing insecurity, with a parent who's stressed and maybe unavailable or maybe depressed. But there's only so far that can go. And so the schools were given a job that is really not something that they could really do, which was to change the lives of poor children by increasing their performance on standardized tests. So emphasis on, I guess you could say, getting children into a groove of learning English language arts and math and keeping them in that groove and trying to make school be something that they were willing or wanted to do. And the result of it was this massive increase in the amount of control being demonstrated by teachers in the environment. School became less fun than it used to be, much less fun, because it was only about preparing for tests. And so a style of teaching that those of you with teaching degrees probably will have come across, typically called direct instruction, where the teacher virtually teaches from a script, okay, to ensure maximal retention of the new information. But also the teacher became much more in control of the classroom. And so it was seen as very positive for the teacher to be absolutely, for every minute of the day, the center of attention and in complete control of the children to ensure that they were learning adequately. And they learned some other things too. If you could have children recite things as a group, then there would be some reinforcement of learning. And the style of a classroom shifted, or the style of the ideal classroom, particularly one in public education, and particularly one that serves children from poor backgrounds, that style of teaching really took on kind of a life of its own. And I want you to answer the question, what are children learning here in a classroom that is kind of an exemplar, okay? This is a teacher who's been identified as really good at modern teaching techniques. And so she's been asked to demonstrate all of these great techniques for classroom management, for accelerated learning for the children. And I have to explain, this is almost a caricature. It's not really what every day looks like, but she's been asked to show off all of her tricks, which makes it really extraordinary to see how this classroom works. And I want to emphasize, this is not really how that classroom works every day. She's been asked to demonstrate all of these great classroom management techniques. So I want you to watch what happens here, and I want you to think to yourself, what are the children learning? Okay, we should have audio. But we don't have audio. Stand by. Yeah, we should have audio. I got nothing. Okay, I'm gonna do this.
Let's give her a big 10 finger woo. Ready? The rules of the classroom. The rules of the classroom. Rule number 1, follow directions quickly. Rule number 2, raise your hand for permission to are doubles. Doubles. I can add doubles. To do that, we need a little more room. So we will be walking on syllables. Ready? Bodies around. Monkey. Monkey. Alligator. Alligator. Lion. Lion. Tiger. Tiger. Giraffe. Giraffe. Sloth.
Oh, I bet you'd like to keep watching that, but I'm going to stop and move on now. My guess is they'd vote to nuke America if they were in the submarine. Because this is about compliance, isn't it? Okay, you got to stop watching that now. Yeah, this is about compliance, so children will learn the things they need so they can do well on the test. And it's a little bit ironic because there are many methods of identified effective pedagogy. There's partner teaching, peer teaching, okay, we got that one checked off. There's this group recitation, which actually does aid retention. Yes, it does. The children seem to be, they're having fun, right? Yeah, they're having fun. I mean, it's a kind of fun. But they're not learning moral agency, I would propose to you. They're learning compliance. It's a happy compliance. This is not an evil, destructive environment, at least not on the surface. Are they developing agency? Are they making choices? Are they learning where the seat of their curiosity lies? It's a different kind of pedagogy, and it's a pedagogy where the teacher is the absolute primary agent within the classroom. The teacher is the agent. And the teacher is very proud of her ability, well, to create social compliance among her students. And it's effective if this is what you're trying to do, especially with poor children who have stress and behavioral problems and need to be shoved into a groove. And if only there was another way to help children from all backgrounds develop things like self-control and find their curiosity and be able to, teach themselves all the things that she's going to teach them. Let's look at another example now. So what are these children learning here? And this is a silent movie, but you can observe and think about what their experience is. It's not a very shouty environment, is it? How is the child spoken to? How is the child regarded in this environment? Are they an object to be manipulated into compliance? Is respect for their individual, is the respect for their self, is the respect being modeled here? So you know the rest. This is just a day in the office for a Montessori teacher. You cannot describe you could not come up with a more different version of what school could be. And if all you've ever known was the teacher in charge teaching a curriculum, it'd be hard to imagine what would be possible in a Montessori classroom. But this is just another day at the office. So what are the children learning here? Well, they're certainly not learning that it's their role to comply with the teacher's orders. I think that leads one direction. That leads to compliance. That leads to social coercion. That leads to pushing the button and launching the nukes, because that's what you're supposed to do. And of course, something else as we've been talking about all week, this is also what the result of this environment is. And it's kind of ironic, because there's nobody who doesn't want this. There's no one who doesn't want this in education. But there are different ways of doing education. There are different ways of doing school. What she's doing, well, that's the way that's winning right now. If the only thing that matters is how well students do on tests that are specifically about academic skills, if that's the only thing, and we need to get the scores up from all children, especially children from poor backgrounds, then we will adopt a teaching practice that is absolutely teacher-directed. And if we have content material that they need to learn, then we're going to be teacher-directed on the material from the curriculum. Teacher-directed, curriculum-oriented. And in fact, there are two axes that we can describe with that. Teacher-directed, highly structured curriculum. That's conventional education. It's a teacher's directive versus non-directive. And it's a highly structured curriculum versus a non-structured curriculum. There are other ways to do school. There are other pedagogies. You represent a different pedagogy from that. You represent a pedagogy that might be described as more constructivist or developmental. And you have a curriculum. The difference is that you're not like coerced all the children to do the pink tower at the same time. And if you don't get the pink tower today, well, we're moving on tomorrow. So we hope you'll be able to catch up on your own. In fact, we can describe many pedagogies using this kind of two-axis system. How much is the teacher the boss of the classroom? How fixed and structured is the curriculum? We can, in a theoretical way, we can map lots of pedagogies onto this kind of space. We could say that that teacher in that classroom, upper right-hand corner, pretty much to the extreme, upper right-hand corner. In fact, there's a model that's popular in American education. It's called the no excuses model. No excuses. All children can learn. All children can learn if we have a teacher who is absolutely the center of attention, the primary agent, and if we have a very clear curriculum and a teacher who's teaching the curriculum. That's the no excuses model. And it's not that different from how school used to be in my day, but in my day, school used to be about other things too. Maybe in your day, school was about a lot of things instead of just how well you would do on 2 high-stakes examinations. But there are lots of ways to do school. We can do kind of a project-based model. Maybe Reggio Emilia falls into that. The teacher still has a more supervisory role, but there's more freedom, and the curriculum is less fixed. And we can probably find a place for Steiner in there. We can find a place for democratic or free schools, very loose, no structure, teachers not in charge. They're kind of the lower left corner. They can do school too. They can figure out how to create a developmental experience. And of course, this is where you sit. Montessori kind of defines the facilitating teacher with a structured curriculum. It's just not one that's reinforced with a stick, because the child proceeds through that structure on their own, facilitated by a teacher who's not teaching, but creating conditions for self-instruction. Now, the irony of the modern age, this is it, the irony of the modern age is that everybody wants to build brains. Everybody wants to do a brain-oriented approach to education. No one disputes that brain development, nurturing the developing mind, no one disputes that that's a high value, and we should be emphasizing that. The irony of education in the modern age is pretty much everybody else is doing it to one degree or another, except the conventional approach, which is only about how well you do on tests, and in no way, so you know the answer. I mean, everything we've been talking about, how do you help a brain grow? Well, you have to facilitate the brain's development and growth, what we talked about yesterday and the day before. And the irony of the modern age is that what's winning in countries all over the world is the approach that is least effective in doing that. And to be fair, the problem is it's also hard to do those other approaches. Those approaches that lack an inherent structure, they're hard to do. Most teachers doing them are having a hard time doing them well. You're saved. You've got an inherent structure. You can be having a bad day, and the children know what they're doing. In fact, you can be sick. You can be not so active in your class. You can be hungover. You can be hungover, and there's more development happening in your classroom than would ever happen in a conventional classroom, because the children know what to do. The classroom with children demonstrating normalization is the classroom that takes care of itself. Well, that brings us to another cognitive capability that is also developed in this environment. And that's a capability that's described in the scientific literature as moral development. Your ability to make decisions, to make decisions in circumstances that involve either an allocation of resources or that have to do with basic issues of fairness, or really have to do with the question, what's the right thing to do? What's the right thing to do here as it pertains to affecting others? And there's a fair bit of research on this, and much of it was done decades ago, but it still continues to have some validity today. There's been some revisions and some updating, but I'm going to describe to you kind of the classic orientation, the classic perspective on moral development. And I'll talk a little bit about newer research, but this is all I think you'll find this very interesting. And the early research on moral development was oriented around presenting adults and adolescents and children with a little story, a little puzzle that involves a moral decision. And then asking interview-like questions. What would you do? What's the right thing to do? Why is that the right thing to do? What else could a person do? Why should someone do the thing that you've said is the thing to do? What are your reasons? It's not so much about what to do, because in any moral dilemma, there really is more than one thing that one could do. And one could have reasons to do one thing or the other. One can have reasons. The interest is in what kind of reasons the individual has to support the decision about what is the right thing to do. Now, I have a moral dilemma for you to read. Now, I don't think I'm going to read this to you in English while you read it in Portuguese. However, our friends translating don't know this, but I'm going to ask them to read it to you over the headset in Portuguese, because I don't think everyone's going to be able to say that. Are we okay back there? Will you read this out loud in Portuguese? Thank you, okay. The name of this dilemma, and it's a famous one, so if you were to do a little Google search on moral development research, you would find the dilemma that's called Heinz and the Drug. And I'm going to sit here while you read that and while our friends in back read it out loud to you in case you can't see it. You got it? Now, I could ask you, what should Hines do? Should he steal the drug? Should he not steal the drug? But actually, that's not the most important part of this, because you can make a very principled case for why he should steal a drug or why he shouldn't steal the drug. In fact, what's interesting here, less interesting than is what you think he should do, is the reasoning behind why you think he should do that. So when one hears this and one is asked what's the right thing to do, that's only part of it, and that's actually the least important part of it. Now, okay, so I'm in a Montessori audience. I know you people. Probably most of you would say, absolutely, he should steal the drug, you know, and he should steal it because, well, you would probably say, most of you, because the value of a life is the highest value, which, by the way, is a pretty principled argument. But not everyone would make that argument. There's a principled argument to not steal the drug. The principled argument is, yeah, but other people also need the drug. And so while he might want to save his life, maybe for the good of society, really for the good of humanity, we need to have a fairer way of allocating valuable, scarce resources. That's what's best for all. Okay, so yeah, go home. Maybe he shouldn't steal the drug even though you want him to, okay? Because there's a basic principle here that we need to address, which is maybe from the standpoint of universal values and universal fairness, maybe that's not the reason to, maybe that's not the thing to do. It doesn't matter what to do. It matters, for the purpose of this research, how you support that decision. And it turns out that people make very different arguments for what Hines should do. There are some rather sophisticated arguments for why he should and shouldn't. And there are some rather primitive arguments for why he should or shouldn't. And I'm going to show you a picture of a test that was created decades ago that presents Hines and other dilemmas and offers you a whole bunch of options. So which of these reasons do you think is the most important? Which is the most important? Which is the second most important? And what is the third most important? You don't have this, obviously you can't read this, but these are the kind of things that are on the test, okay? So rate these items in terms of their importance. So whether a community's laws are going to be upheld, that's a consideration. Okay, are we going to have a law society driven by laws or by each person's own actions that maybe even are self-serving? Isn't it only natural for a loving husband to care so much for his wife that he'd steal? It's understandable. He's a husband. A husband looks after his wife. Yeah, but is Hines willing to risk going to jail for the chance that stealing a drug might help? I don't know, man. I don't want to go to jail. Sorry, baby. I'm not going to jail for you. I'm not going to jail for anybody. Well, does it matter if he's stealing it for himself or maybe to help another person? Is it altruistic or is it selfish? Does that matter? What about the druggist? Doesn't he have rights to his intellectual, to the production of his intellectual labor? I mean, he made the invention. Maybe we should respect the fact that it's his invention. Or maybe we should consider what are the values that are going to be the basis for governing how people in our society act towards each other. And there are other reasons. Whether the druggist is going to be allowed to hide behind a worthless law which only protects the rich anyhow. Or whether the law might be getting in the way of the most basic claim for any member of society. Whether the druggist deserves to be robbed for being so greedy and cruel. Well, okay, would stealing this drug bring about more total good for the whole society, or would it not? Okay, so we're not going to do this exercise today, but I think you understand that some of these sound a little more, I guess you would say, sophisticated, but really, they sound sophisticated because they cover more cases. They're more generalizable. They're more abstract in the sense that we can start talking about principles. Now, it's kind of an interesting dilemma, and I can say as an American who spends a lot of time in Europe, it's kind of quaint that the man has a kind of a German-sounding name. This must have been really great for American, research was done in the United States to begin with. So Hines, okay, and he lives in some European country. Well, Hines is a vaguely alien-sounding name, so there must be some European country. I think it's kind of, as a sad note, I think that's kind of charming, you know? Hines, some exotic foreign land in Europe, someplace in Europe. Okay, well, maybe it's funnier for me. Okay. But remarkably, we just had an example like this happen in the United States in the past couple of years. You know what this is? This is an EpiPen. If you are allergic to bees or nuts or something and you ingest a bee or a nut, and you have this risk of, the anaphylaxis, right? You shoot yourself with one of these and it buys you some time to get to the hospital. You know what an EpiPen is. Well, okay, a company called Mylan bought the EpiPen rights from the company that had been producing it for years. Now, for years, the EpiPen cost the American consumer $57 a piece. And Mylan immediately jacked the price up to over $600 because they could, okay? Because they could. And so they made piles of money selling EpiPens for $600 for a pack of 2. The price went up over 450% because a greedy drug company could do that in the American healthcare system. Anyway, modern example. So let's talk more about, and really the father of this whole field of inquiry is a man whose name was Lawrence Kohlberg. And in fact, right around the time that Vasily Alexandrovich Arkhipov was saving the world, Lawrence Kohlberg had just joined the psychology department at the University of Chicago. Who knows, maybe some of Kohlberg's thinking was influenced by current events. And through analysis of how people respond to moral dilemmas, like Heinz and the drug, and there's many other ones, you can find more moral dilemmas online. And once you get the hang of it, you can write moral dilemmas. I mean, it's not that hard to come up with these kind of decisions that people have to make. Well, through analysis of the kinds of reasons that people gave for, stealing the drug or not, or other things, Kohlberg identified what he described as stages of moral reasoning. And the stage that was most typical in young children was what he called the pre-conventional stage. This was an orientation around punishment and obedience. Within pre-conventional, he identified 2 substages. One he called the punishment and obedience orientation, where right and wrong is determined solely by what's going to be punished. If you're not going to be punished, it's fine. If you're going to be punished, you shouldn't do that. It's the wrong thing to do because somebody will give you a spanking. That's the reason not to do it. That's a young child's level. People would base their moral decisions on the fear of punishment and thus avoid punishment. Children obey because adults tell them to obey, with the implied threat of a punishment. Now, stage 2 was self-interest. Slightly more, you might say, abstract, although we're not really abstract yet, is that right and wrong is determined by what is rewarded or what is personally profitable. It's not abstract. It's a different orientation. Children obey when it's in their best interest to obey. Well, yeah, I'll do this if I get this payoff. Sure, okay. I'm going to get a payoff. I'm in. So, for example, Heinz should steal the drug and save his wife because it's nice to have a wife. Better to have a wife than not, so yeah, I'll save the wife. I like having a wife. She cooks, she cleans, occasionally she puts out. That's a good thing, right? People have that very... Okay, you laughed at that one. Okay, that was a joke that you got. Okay. Fine then. Yeah, okay. I'm not stooping to your level again, though. That's it. I'm not going to go back there again. Yeah, probably. Yeah, okay. I think we can erase that. We can rewind the tape and we can erase that part. Or, Heinz shouldn't steal the drug because he doesn't want to go to jail, right? Okay, bring it back, sorry. Bring it back. So he should steal the drug because he doesn't want to lose his wife, or he shouldn't steal the drug because he doesn't want to go to jail. But then Kohlberg also identified slightly more sophisticated stages, and he called these stages, he called this the conventional stage. So, for example, at stage 3, which he called the stage of conformity, he should steal the medicine because that's what a husband does. Okay, so what do husbands do? They look after their wives. Therefore, Heinz, as a good husband, should steal the drug. That's conforming to social expectations about what a husband does. Or he should not steal the drug because stealing is bad, and Hines is not a criminal. Only a criminal steals. Hines is not a criminal, so he obeys the law. The conformity stage. Now, there's a second element in conformity, which is the law and order stage, which is where Kohlberg identified most adults in a society are at. The law and order. Hines should not steal the medicine because the law prohibits stealing, which makes it illegal, and we follow the law in our society, so he shouldn't steal the drug. Or, from the law and order perspective, he should steal the drug for his wife, but he also needs to take his punishment. Steal the drug and go to jail, because that's what you have to do when you commit a crime. And in fact, you know Edward Snowden, right? You know that name, Edward Snowden? Okay, well, it was really interesting how many people, how many pundits, how many people in the media said he's a coward because he fled the country and he should come home regardless of what the value of what he did was, right? Regardless of the value to society, Snowden is a coward. A man would come back to the country and face a trial and face his punishment if a punishment is determined. That's what a man does, but he's a coward. Regardless of the good of society for releasing this information about the government doing things that it said it wasn't doing. It's a classic stage 4 argument. Yes, he did good, perhaps, but he still needs to face the prison sentence that he deserves for breaking the law. Okay, so you get the idea? Now, there's also, Kohlberg identified post-conventional. Post-conventional, like and more advanced than conventional. So at stage 5, which he called the human rights stage, Hines should steal the medicine because everyone has a right to life, regardless of what the law says. That the right to human life is a more important right than the need to follow the law. Or Hines should not steal the medicine because the druggist has a right to fair compensation for having created this invention. So even if his wife is sick, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make his action right because the druggist has personal rights, his own rights to his invention. And then finally at stage 6, which Kohlberg identified as the kind of the highest, he called it the universal human ethics, universal ethics. Hines should steal the medicine because stealing a human life is a more fundamental value than the property rights of another person. Rights to life trump rights to property. Or Hines should not steal the medicine because others may need the medicine just as badly, and their lives are also important. So by stealing the drug, Hines deprives their rights. There should be a way, and Hines has decided himself what the decision will be. Are you all with me? Do you find this kind of interesting? I mean, this really comes down to it, about how to live in a society and how to act as a, this is basic principle of how to be with other human beings. I think it's just fascinating, and as you study this, you start thinking about the way that decisions get made around you. And Lou has done a magnificent job of translating so much of the text in this lecture. And there's a handy table here for you to look at when you get a copy of the notes. In Portuguese describing these stages, okay? So Kohlberg also has offered observations from his research. It's possible to be physically mature, but not morally mature. That moral development is not the same thing as physical development. And also that moral development is not automatic. Okay, to some degree, physical growth and development is a consequence of being fed and being watered. But moral development is not automatic. It doesn't simply happen as a consequence with increasing age. And if a child is spoiled, it never has to take into consideration other people's needs. Or if they're raised in an environment with adults who model low stage, like stage 2 reasoning, they're surviving so far, right? They're surviving by stealing and by getting away with stuff. Well, the child will learn about stealing and getting away with stuff, and they won't be challenged to evolve a higher stage. And also Kohlberg declared, and he's right in this, in that the sequence it's a developmental sequence that is invariant and sequential. Now, you Montessorians understand about sort of invariant stages of development. You're not doing, you're not stringing words together with the movable alphabet. There are things you have to do, like identify phonology, be able to read single words before you start stringing the words together with the movable alphabet. If anybody understands a developmental sequence, it's a Montessori teacher. And similar, because the higher stages are more advanced, higher stages reflect more advanced cognitive capabilities applied to the problem of what is the right thing to do. So one has to have more advanced stages of cognitive capability in order to apply these higher stages of moral reasoning. Do you understand why that would be the case? People cannot comprehend moral reasoning at a stage more than one stage beyond their own. I mean, you try explaining to somebody who thinks it's okay if you can get away with it, try explaining to them why we need to apply principles of universal human justice in solving our moral problems. The response is going to be, screw you got to be kidding me. I don't get this mumbo jumbo. All I know is I'm going to get mine because I can get it. They won't understand the universalizable human ethics. They won't get that. You might as well be speaking a foreign language. He also noted that people tend to be attracted, however, to reasoning that is maybe one stage above their own. Because they can, and isn't this beautiful? They are attracted to one stage above their own because it is a more adequate way of thinking about social problems. Just like the child finds that new material intriguing. I haven't got it yet, but I get that there's something there. And it's a little cooler than what I've already figured out how to do now. There's a similar kind of an appeal for a +1 argument made in moral decision making. Yeah, I didn't really think about it that way, but I can kind of see your point. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. That's the response to an argument that's one stage above one's own reasoning. Movement through the stages is affected when a person's dominant cognitive outlook is not adequate to cope with a given moral problem. In small communities, like in a remote small village where everybody knows everybody, let's go back in history to a place where, let's say, 25 people, 4 families of 25 people total, maybe 30 people live in the same little area. And I agree to do something for my neighbor. And my neighbor agrees to pay me for that. Well, in these small communities, a handshake is gold, right? A handshake is the thing. And part of the reason a handshake is gold is because if you fail to complete your obligation, if you fail to pay your neighbor, it's not like you're going to be able to escape the fact that this person knows that you didn't pay him for what he or she did. So you don't need to have contract law. You don't need to develop a capacity for writing written contracts and signatures if you're never going to not know everyone who's around you. But when you start developing cities and civilizations where you are exchanging goods and services with people that you don't know and don't live near you, then there needs to be an enforcement system for these kinds of agreements, and that's contract law, okay? But you don't need contract law if you live with like 30 other people in 4 houses. Same thing with moral reasoning. These higher stages really only have to evolve in people when they are in situations that there's enough participants in the society that they have to start getting principled instead of just personal. You understand me with this? So how do we promote the growth of children? Most people will agree that higher stages of moral reasoning are a good thing, but it's a developmental thing, okay? It's a developmental thing. You can teach what is the right thing to do, but it's a developmental thing. The person has to get their own sort of awareness of it. But one thing you can do is you can give examples of people who were great examples of moral human beings, because human beings learn how to be human beings from other human beings. When people say, I try to remember how my dad would have approached a situation like this, because I had great respect for my father. He was a wise man, and he was a good man. How would Dad have done it? That's what I try to use as my guide. Sure, people say that, or my mom, or my uncle, or I can think of people that I knew who helped train me as a psychologist, and I could try them on sometimes, okay? I could try them on and think about how they would think about solving a particular problem. And this is how it is. This is social learning. This is simulating some other mind in your mind to try to think about how that mind would do it. And so, we use examples of people like Martin Luther King, a great man, a great human being, and a moral example who absolutely knew that he would die. He knew he would be assassinated, but there was a value that was greater than his own life, which was this principle of fairness. Well, Maria Montessori, let's just say that's a life that wasn't an easy one. She was driven by a need that was greater than her own comfort and convenience to create a world of peace, beginning with the child. Oh, people talk about Gandhi, and so we can use examples of people who have existed to try to help us understand more sophisticated ways of thinking about the problem of what is the right thing to do. We get books published. Okay, I'll tell you a funny story. Now, Lou found this book in Portuguese, but I could not paste it in. I didn't have the right stuff in front of me. But you've heard of the Book of Virtues? There's a Portuguese edition? Okay. Now I'll tell you something funny about William Bennett. Highly conservative, right-wing media pundit, lost millions of dollars gambling and didn't tell his wife. Oh yeah, there's the moral virtue right there. $8 million of gambling he lost. He was called on it publicly, and he had confessed that, yeah, he did have a gambling problem, and maybe he should stop gambling. Oh. So maybe telling people what they should do and giving them examples is one way, but it's maybe not the way for everybody. Well, actually, it illustrates another point. Just because you are capable of high stages of moral reasoning doesn't mean that you'll necessarily use them. And we'll get to that aspect in a second. Another way to develop people's capacity to do moral reasoning is to actually talk about moral dilemmas, either moral dilemmas like Heinz and the drug, or to talk about situations in life that we encounter or that our society encounters that require moral decision-making. In fact, it's kind of a fascinating topic. People like to talk about these things. Hey, by the way, we're going until 11, right? I go until 11? Yeah, okay, just wanted to make sure. And so you can sit around and discuss the moral crises of our day, or even the moral crisis that emerged from work. And if you talk about these things with your children and talk about the best way to address them, they will learn these things too. Another way to help promote the growth of moral reasoning is to create what Kohlberg described as a just community. In fact, in 1974, he worked with schools to set up democracy-based programs where both students and teachers were given a vote to decide on school policies. Well, that's one way of doing school. The purpose of these programs was to build a sense of community in schools in order to promote democratic values and increase moral reasoning. Kohlberg's ideas and development of these just communities was greatly influenced by his time living in an Israeli kibbutz when he was a young adult. And he saw the value of everyone having an interest and everyone having a share in a group's processes and products. And he thought, yeah, that's a way that's fair. That's a fair way. And do you know anybody else who does just communities as a way that they might do education? Does anybody you know do a just community style approach to schooling? Well, if you spend some time in the fall talking about the rules for your classroom, you are doing some things that were around creating a just community. In fact, that's a fundamental aspect of Montessori. I've been talking for 58 minutes. How's everybody doing? Are you okay? Have I lost you? There's a lot of words in this particular presentation, but it's okay. Now I'll show you a table with very small printing, but you don't have to read this. This is a table, so it turns out that the way that moral developing develops, and this is just there for me as a reminder, and you can read this in Portuguese thanks to Lou's translation when you get the slides afterward, okay? So this is just a kind of a placeholder for me. It turns out that there are parallel stages on the way to moral development. There's a cognitive stage that Kohlberg very much referenced Piaget. You know Piaget? Okay, so Piaget's stages. Kohlberg found parallels to the stages of moral reasoning that he identified with Piaget's stages of cognitive capability. But there also were identified what they described as intermediate stages of perspective taking. So roll that term around, perspective taking. Because I need to be able to put myself into your shoes before I can consider what is the right thing to do, given that you too have a perspective. If I cannot consider your perspective, then the whole business of moral reasoning is kind of an abstraction, which is why, at the lowest stages of moral reasoning, one really isn't considering another person, another soul, because one doesn't really have the cognitive capacity to sort of like imagine what the world looks like from that other soul's perspective. You understand this? So it turns out that there were identified these kind of sequential stages. You've got to have a sufficient cognitive capability in order to adopt the perspective of another person or the perspective of an entire society of other people in order to form the basis for the kind of thinking that you need to do to solve that moral problem at that level of sophistication. You cannot begin to make a case for universalizable human rights if you cannot cognitively imagine a universe of other souls. Not just one other, but every other. And every other soul has a perspective. And we're in a room full of 300 distinct, unique universes. And your universe is valuable, okay? Because you are valuable. And my universe is maybe a different one. But because all of our universes have to live together, then we should think about how to organize our collective universe so that there's space for everyone. That's pretty advanced. Children can't do that. Criminals tend not to do that. And white-collar criminals can do that, but choose not to. So there are these stages, beginning with cognitive stages, and this is the table that Lou has graciously translated into Portuguese, so you can read this when you have a copy of the slides. So the sequence goes like this. There's got to be a cognitive capacity, and then that cognitive capacity is applied to social perspective taking, putting oneself into another's shoes, and then to the decision making around what is the right thing to do based upon considering others or many others' points of view. Now, I've already said something about it. There are some very intelligent people in this world who are absolutely capable of high levels of perspective taking and high levels of moral reasoning. But the decision to behave morally, or the decision to utilize one's highest stage of moral reasoning, well, it's kind of a personal decision to make. There's this element then of what is the motivation? What is the source of motivation to behave morally? Now, do you have adolescent Montessori programs in Brazil? Okay, a couple, yeah? Okay. So you probably, those of you who do that work, have come across the term valorization. And maybe others know this term in Montessori, valorization. So today's not about valorization, but I would say if you do adolescent work, I would suggest that valorization of the personality is a strong motivator as one feels one's own contribution and value, one's unique contribution to a social group. I think that level of affiliation that valorization brings is highly motivating to make decisions and to take actions that are in behalf of all of them. That's another day, and I can come back and do a lecture about that sometime if you're interested in that. Now, the cognitive capacity very much is associated with, executive functions, which we haven't talked about this week, but you know something about executive functions, right? And we can point to the work by Angeline Lillard to talk about both the executive function development of children and also evidence of the advanced social development that they show as a consequence of that. And I've already made a reference to this paper, and I don't know if someone has translated this into Portuguese, but you know, it'd be, okay, fantastic, okay. So you know this paper, and I keep coming back to this because it is really an excellent study, okay. It's the best research paper on Montessori to date. And you're familiar with this table where she shows all these various outcomes from early academic skills all the way through executive functioning to, yeah, there's executive functioning. We show that Montessori children have superior executive functioning. And we also find, oh yeah, and why do they have superior executive functioning? Well, for example, there's a child practicing self-control, right? There's a child observing who's not interfering, and that child is practicing the self-regulatory aspect of control of inhibition. These children walking on the line are learning to control their bodies. And now that you know that cognition exists to control the body, that thinking is movement without action, it should not surprise you to learn that practice controlling the body leads to practice controlling one's behavior more generally. So self-control begins practicing controlling the body, which is the self, okay? So yeah, we've talked about perspective taking, and so yeah, these are the parallel stages of perspective taking. And how do we support perspective taking in Montessori? Well, the mixed stage environment is essential for the development of perspective taking. I guess you got a little rumble in the background. Is everything okay? Is everything okay, or is there a reason to interrupt the lecture? That's a joke, okay? That's funny. So when we see children spontaneously demonstrating care for each other in this environment, when we see the older children helping out the younger children, actually I'm seriously concerned about the volume now because I don't want people to be distracted. Is there a problem in back? Is everything okay? We're getting water. Okay. Well, drink it in good health, people. Drink it in good health. It's a basic need. I respect that basic need. But I'm going to wait till people stop talking. So, you know, I'm not going anywhere. My flight's at 10 o'clock tomorrow, so you can keep talking, but I'm not going to continue until we're done. And I say that with love. I say that with love. Okay. So let's come back to that mixed age environment. If we were never a Montessori child ourselves, we won't know directly, but because we can take the perspective of a child, we can imagine what it's like. I can remember my own daughter when she began her Montessori experience, and you have stories like this too. So she had had the phase-in, you know, the week before school started, just the new children were introduced to the Montessori classroom by her teacher. And then the next week came, and all the children were there, right? And I remember like on the second day, or maybe the third day, when I was taking her to school and I dropped her off. And, you know, as the supportive, enthusiastic, friendly dad, I said, wow, Isabel, look at all the kids. I said kids, sorry. And from the back seat, Isabel, with her still developing language, says, too many kids. Because it was overwhelming, right? It was scary for her. There were too many kids. But of course, you know exactly what happened. There were older kids who remembered what it was like to be the new kid. And so those older kids, okay, now I'm going to get all misty because I'm talking about my daughter, okay? You would do the same. You do the same. So what is it like to be the 2.5-year-old who has never been confronted by this social world? To have both a loving and warm teacher and the cooler, older kids to reach out, to make a space, to speak kindly, to be reassuring, to help guide her through those first days and weeks. Well, why do they do that? Why do Montessori children so spontaneously and naturally exhibit these kinds of behaviors? Because they were once the 2.5-year-old kids starting, and they've had no reason to not be kind to each other because they're in the environment that they're in. And so if you don't have that mixed age environment, you don't have that built-in perspective taking. Later, when my daughter was in elementary school at a Montessori program when she was 12, I picked her up from her Montessori school, and as we're getting into the car, she says, "Do you see that little girl on the swings in the red coat?" "Yes, I see her." She says, "That's Nina. She's my mentee." Okay, and then she says, "She's so cute." And the mentees were the young children, the big kids, the cool kids. So Isabel would read to Nina. Nina would sit with Isabel during school assemblies, in the auditorium. And Nina, I'm pretty sure, looked up to her mentor, Isabel. Isabel knew how to be a mentor. She had had a mentor. Isabel knew what Nina was experiencing, what she was feeling, because Isabel experienced that. So that's how you build that sense of perspective taking. You don't have to teach, you cannot teach perspective taking. And children can't experience perspective taking to this degree if they're not in a mixed age environment, where perspective taking is kind of, it's baked in, right? Perspective taking is baked in to a mixed age environment. I gotta go call my daughter. I'll be right back. Okay. So Lillard showed us that there was advanced executive functioning in Montessori children, and she also showed that they had advanced social cognition. Specifically, the task that she describes here was a task of social perspective taking, a laboratory task where, I won't go into the details of it, but it's like a little dollhouse environment, and something happens, and then the child is asked, this new person who just came in the door, what do they see, and what do they think has happened because you've changed, made some manipulation in the room. Montessori children show advanced perspective taking. Isn't that interesting? And then finally, again, back to the table, which is a reminder for me. You can read it in Portuguese. Oh, wait, I got to finish on here. Yeah. Now, what Lillard also showed was that when it came to solving problems that involved other people, okay. Yeah, voicemail. It's gone to voicemail. We're all good. Oh, yeah. The next one down, the one right beneath the little light blue box that's pointed to, I skipped the arrow for the next one, which is references to justice. So Lillard read to the children little like mini moral dilemmas. Sarah's been on the swing a long time, and you would like to go on the swing. What should you do or say to Sarah so that you can go on the swing? Now, there are lots of things that young children would be willing to do or say to somebody who's been on the swing too long. Like, seriously, they say things like, I would hit her. Yeah, that's a response. That's a response that a child could give. Or, I would tell her that I'm going to get my dad to hit her. But the Montessori children, it should surprise you not one bit, because the Montessori children made references to principles of justice and fairness. You've been on the swing for a long time. I think it would be fair if I got to ride on the swing for a while, and then we could trade off so we each have time. That's what Montessori children say. And they arrive at that very naturally, as you understand. They arrive at that naturally. They have the executive function stage. They have the social perspective taking experience leading to a parallel stage of social perspective taking, and they live in an environment in a just community that promotes spontaneously the development of higher stages of moral reasoning. So that's what Kohlberg said. Now, okay, Kohlberg's research and theory is brilliant. It's not without criticism. It was very much a product of its time, which was like the 50s through the 70s. There have been other moral philosophers doing research. This is a woman named Carol Gilligan. And she had a critique of Kohlberg's work that said, boy, you know, she said, you know what, I think that there are kind of two kinds of moral voices. And she characterized them as maybe a masculine and a feminine voice. And her assertion was the masculine voice was kind of logical and individualistic, you know, very cognitive in its nature. And the emphasis was on moral decisions in protecting the rights of people and making sure justice is upheld. Rights of people, rights and justice. That was definitely Kohlberg's orientation. You know, Gilligan's perspective was that there was a feminine voice that was maybe more oriented around protecting interpersonal relationships and taking care of other people, particularly vulnerable other people. And that's a legitimate voice that needs to be considered in the debate. Kohlberg's model is not complete. And maybe it's not the only lens we can use to arrive at the answer, what is the right thing to do? Gilligan has a legitimate point on this. So a focus, a care perspective, a perspective oriented around care for others, is less about focusing on individual rights, but more on ensuring the well-being of other people, particularly vulnerable other people. And that's a legitimate perspective. So the story is not complete, and research around how people develop what other... And the other thing that's true, okay, I've talked to you about stages. I've talked a lot about stages. Okay, there are no stages. There are no stages. This is all an artifact. Piaget's stages, not really. It's not valid. Piaget's tasks. Look at the Montessori curriculum. We have graduated increase in difficulty. Every step is half a step, a very gradual rise in difficulty. So a child has a new challenge that's just within their reach. Just within their reach, just within their reach. So when Piaget did his work to identify stages of cognitive ability, it was as if he went from, within the Montessori curriculum, he went from here, and then to here, and then to here. So there's lots of intermediate levels of ability that he simply skipped because he had a very limited number of tasks. And as it happens, you could find in the Montessori curriculum, you know, like going from Pink Tower to, I don't know, like what would you be doing a year later in sensorial? Some dang hard thing, right? Yeah, okay, so yeah, so it'd be as if all you had was the Pink Tower and the trinomial cube, okay? Yeah, you know, they wouldn't get it, they'd have this mastered, and then one day their cognitive ability would have advanced to the point where, oh, they can do a trinomial cube now. Oh, it must be that they've taken some great cognitive leap. Or, we didn't have the methodology to capture all that little growth along the way. Do you understand what I mean? So stages really aren't valid. But they're kind of an interesting model, and that's how I want to propose. This is kind of a way of thinking, because yeah, cognition does improve, you know? And moral reasoning does become more sophisticated, but it doesn't really take these jumps. It's more like gradually increasing sophistication, particularly in an area around which you have an interest or are doing work. Now, I'm almost done. I'm going to end by talking about the work that one of the men who was part of my dissertation committee, James Rest, did. We talked about that you can have a high stage of moral reasoning, but you can choose not to use it. And so Rest focused his work on moral motivation. And so that questionnaire type thing that I began with, there's actually an index from that is your propensity to apply your highest available stage of moral reasoning. It's called the Utilizer Index. Will you utilize your highest stage of moral reasoning given the opportunity to do so? Not everyone will. And so I'm going to end by talking about how we in conventional education tend to try to promote moral motivation. And I'm going to argue that the way you promote moral motivation, maybe without realizing it, is vastly superior to anything that happens in conventional education to promote the motivation to treat others everywhere around the world with a higher stage of moral development. I'm curious if it has filtered down to Brazil. Have you heard the phrase, we should celebrate diversity? Okay, yeah. It's a good thing, right? We should accommodate, we should say, yes, all are welcome. All persons from all backgrounds are a part of our community. That is correct. It's a focus in education because education needs to address the needs of all children from all backgrounds. So here's, it's a simple Google search. Do your own, right? Here's 6 ways to celebrate diversity in the classroom. Okay, 6 ways on that one. Oh, here's 9 ways, okay, right? Turns out there are as many as 9 ways to celebrate diversity. Yeah, there it is, 9 ways. And the issue with this is that I'm going to propose to you that this is an unbelievably superficial way to try to create a society that is inclusive and that accommodates all people. It's unbelievably superficial, and it specifically highlights those things that have the appearance of differences across children from different cultures. One byproduct of this is that any child from some other culture is placed in the position of being like the spokesperson for their culture, as defined by food, as defined by attire, and as defined by maybe some other superficial characteristics. And there's another problem with this. The reason that we have to urge children to celebrate diversity and accept differences, that it sort of goes against an element of human nature. It is not human nature to readily accept other people who seem to be different, from us. In fact, it is in human nature to create us's and them's on the flimsiest of reasons. You're familiar with research about creating in and out groups experimentally on the basis of eye color. Okay? There's research like that. People readily adopt us and them on the basis of eye color. They readily do that. Or on other superficial characteristics. This is human nature to very readily, very spontaneously create us's and them's. And the urge, and it's not a bad urge, it's a good impulse to celebrate diversity by declaring that we accept all others, somehow has the assumption that others are different. It's assuming that others are different, and we have to create space and be accommodating of people who are different from us. That's a basic assumption, that others are different. But we shouldn't hold that against them. Do you understand my point here? Well, Montessori had a different understanding, and you probably do too. And that understanding is that, you know what? Others aren't different. I'm an American. I come from a different country, but at the human level, I'm not different from you. I'm not different from somebody who lives in Iraq. I'm not different from somebody who lives in North Korea. I'm not different from somebody who lives in the Arctic. You're not different. They're not different from you. They have different cultural practices that, at least at a superficial level, seem to make them different. They have different looking eyes, different looking skin. They use different languages. They have different curious customs. They have different beliefs. They wear different clothes. They eat different food. Their food makes them smell in a different way. But they're not different. You know that. And I think that the Montessori approach to, we don't need to celebrate the differences that exist between us, because from Montessori's perspective, we're not different. For example, we all have spiritual and material needs. We all need to clothe ourselves. We all need to find shelter. That house is different from that house, but, they both serve the same basic need, that human beings need to shelter themselves. And so it seems to me that as we introduce children to the materials and the philosophy and the content of Montessori, one of the things that they take home, you would know better than me, but it seems to me that my daughter is very interested in other people from other places. And it seems to me it'd be very easy to be interested in people who wear different clothes or who eat different food or live in different kinds of houses, because isn't that interesting? Human beings are so ingenious. Human ingenuity is remarkable, because no matter where humans have been dropped down on the planet, well, they find a way to clothe themselves. They find a way to feed themselves. They find a way to domesticate other animals that help feed themselves. They all need to defend themselves, and so people adopt different methods of defense regardless of where they are, because there's competition for those resources, the material resources for clothing or food or construction. And isn't it fascinating that no matter where a human being has been dropped onto our planet, there's a way that they meet these needs. And of course, the way that these needs are met, they over centuries develop into cultures, and there are different cultural practices. And yeah, you know, people meet these needs in different ways and evolve different habits of behavior because of that. But, you know, a Montessori child understands that it's just a manifestation of how humans solve these universal problems in different places. And so if you adopt that perspective, you don't need to celebrate diversity. You don't need to accept the thing that is different and alien about the other, because it's not different. They're just solving the problem with what they have at hand. And I think from that perspective, moral motivation kind of takes care of itself. And Montessori children, I think that they're not inclined when they're adults to like build smokestacks, right? I don't think Montessori children are into building smokestacks, because a smokestack solves a problem right here, a local problem. But they know that what comes out of that smokestack is going to fall on somebody, somewhere, and that person's not different from me. So that's that third aspect, I guess. That's that justice, and that's that positive shared play, because the other is not different from me. We're all in this together. We're all part of the same family. And, well, think of this. Our family all lives in the same place. So isn't that great? So congratulations on the work you do as Montessori teachers. It's been a real privilege to be with you these 3 days. I'm sorry to go, but I'm really grateful that I've been able to be here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. It's been so nice. And what a wonderful community we have. What a wonderful community. Thank you all.
Obrigada, gente. Obrigada ao Dr. Hughes, que mais uma vez nos encantou aqui. A gente, como eu falei, a dinâmica é diferente. A gente não vai parar agora para o coffee break. A gente vai ter uma apresentação da Gisele. A Gisele que emocionou todo mundo no primeiro dia. Vamos ver o que ela aprontou para a gente hoje, logo antes da fala da Lia Diskin. A Gisele aqui, linda, encantadora. Você precisa do microfone.
Pois é, na verdade, eu fui convidada